So I'd like to first open up for questions from the audience. Anyone want to ask a question of the speakers? All right, I will prime the pump. So, go ahead, Phil.
So I'll kick things off, Jim. So two great presentations. So really nice way to set the morning up. Virginie, you're clearly sitting on a mountain of data there. Have you been able to kind of look at any kind of approved therapeutics in your patient sets and understand what subsets may work and kind of who doesn't respond? Or?
We've done that mainly in the cardiovascular space, and we're able to validate our first target that way. And so definitely I'm really, really excited to do that in Parkinson's as a next step.
Because I think kind of what we're starting to see in the neuroscience space is that kind of AD isn't just one form of AD, there's multiple subgroups now. So if you look at something like the ACE inhibitors or whatever, do you think you may be able to unpick groups of patients where they may respond or may not respond?
I think there's the potential for sure to do this, but again, it has to be demonstrated. And so I think it's really the next step is to maybe actually might be able to salvage some of those drugs that they necessarily had a clinical signal but not as impressive. And especially for the immune target, it's such a huge challenge. Like we're seeing therapeutics entering the clinic now. But really finding the right patient population and safety profile might be of a huge challenge. So I think, with this amount of data, we may be able to provide some interesting insights.
You ended your discussion with saying if things get out of hand. And that just triggered something in my mind that I had heard. So excuse this question if it's a little crazy. I heard an expert on AI say that you should never, under any circumstance, give access to the launch codes to AI. Comments? Am I crazy? Am I overreacting?
Why don't we walk down? We'll each do it.
Okay, she likes that.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of questions to be addressed. I think the Turing test has been passed, and so many of us would be fooled interacting with one of these chatbots and thinking it wasn't human. The tools have been built very quickly, but the corresponding science around alignment, this ability to constrain and confine action by these AIs to the things that we're interested in and require, lags behind enormously. And so people talk about this as like a nuclear arms race, where, if you have a superintelligence connected to the internet that could, turn off the heat, cut off, open the floodgates to dams, things could go bad if...
So we should have a little bit of concern?
I do.
Okay.
I'll just say one thing is with great tools come great responsibilities. So I think we need to do that right. And we need to have safeguards along the way, a responsible view on an ethic view on how we access data, how we use AI. So definitely, I think we need to work on that aspect to really prevent those type of things to happen. But it's a concern for a lot of people as of today. What I was excited about is the potential for medicine, and truly there is this unprecedented potential for us to develop better medicines, and really break into incurable diseases today. So I think it's worth exploring for that avenue and making sure we, position safeguards along the way to prevent, use of it that are not very good.
Well, I'm going to play the Socratic method and turn the question into a question for you guys. So you both talked a little bit about the risks that are associated with it. Just like you can use the internet to research how to cure cancer, you can also research how to make a pipe bomb. So, there's two extreme examples, right? What do you see the biggest risk as this AI technology really starts to be deployed in a group of people who've never used the tool before? What do you think some of the early mistakes are going to be?
Go ahead.
So, I think everyone, regardless of politics, everyone, I think, can recognize that there was a lot of noise on social media around the election, right? And that decision-making was complicated by that noise. And I think in a universe where imagined videos and imagined news stories can be generated at scale for no cost, throwing that into any future election is interesting. And there are countless examples like that. So we just, I think the large entities that shape how we interact through the internet, as well as each of us as individuals, need to be thinking about these things, not only when we're creating content, but as we consume it.
I think you get a great point on that aspect of, influencing people's decision-making, right? I think that's probably the biggest concern there. Mick?
So a little less Skynet, but related to both those last two questions, specifically Jim's in terms of it could also be used to make a pipe bomb, okay, if someone has no idea what they're doing. Is there any awareness of exactly what the government's doing to step up their monitoring of people using these tools?
And I believe Tudor or Para yesterday spoke to work Sean Elkins is doing and has been vocal about of, how do you prevent technology getting into the hands of bad actors. And I think I certainly won't say that I know what the scope of those activities are. What I do know is that the emergence and the power of these AIs that can run on a MacBook make constraints that OpenAI or Google put in place less of a firewall. And I realize I'm coming off as like an alarmist here. I'm not. I use this stuff every day. It's incredibly powerful. But we're at a position where we have, 20 years ago, who would have thought all of the things that the internet could do? I think we're at one of those time points today, and we should just take the opportunity to be as mindful as possible.
So my question is for Virginie. So have you guys started using large language models and generative AI for the large data that you have, or are you still in the short term planning to stick to the classical ML and based analysis for coming up with?
Using our own tools, but some of them are language-based. Especially we use that for unstructured data, so meaning, data part of the electronic health record that are, doctor's notes, for example. So we are able to extract information from those unstructured data using machine learning.
I think the problem with AI, we like to think of it as evolving independently, but the way I see it, they're more like children following their parents. So if we, the human parents, will teach AI to be malevolent, it will be malevolent. So it's the intent of the programmer and the team that programs the tool that will lead the outcome. So if the military wants to build killer robots, they will, and they will work for that purpose. If we want to build tools that invent new medicines, we will, because we have the ability to do that. I don't think they function independently. We should probably have a kill switch. I'm not sure it will be able to work because of the distribution of internet, which will allow them to escape. So I have no idea how dangerous this situation is. But it's really up to us collectively to make this work.
But I also have a question for Virginie as well. So the pushback would be, yes, everyone wants the tools to be used appropriately and enable access to all of these amazing innovations. I think the bigger worry is if we really are creating a superintelligence, then it seems very reasonable that it will cease to care what we think as appropriate. And
I still think the parent effect is there. So
Yeah, yes.
it's the values we teach that AI will influence its decisions, at least in the first iteration. Maybe if it generates its own successor, then this effect will disappear. So I have no idea. I mean, clearly some people wish for that to happen because they're working on it.
I think that's the idea around this big pause. How do we stop getting, like escape velocity and creating something that can no longer be controlled?
But the big pause is triggered by Elon because Elon was an early investor in an AI and he left early. So now he's like sour grapes, So I'm not so worried about the big pause. I don't think we need a big pause. Rather, we just need to have ethical AI, which unfortunately Google fired their ethical AI person. I mean, that's the kind of thing that we need. So Sean Eakins was really pointing, this is a danger, we just need to be aware of it
Yeah.
and put safeguards in place.
Yeah.
I think that's what we need to do.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Vic?
So sort of big picture philosophical question, I guess, 10 years from now, maybe 20, maybe 5, and wherever you think the Garner's hype cycle is gonna end on this. Looking at a bunch of researchers, what do you think our jobs are gonna look like?
I think there's definitely room for expert-driven, so like making sure we're on the right path when we build the tool. So in my experience, we can catch pretty early on things that are insights that are not necessarily going to be valuable. And you're also as good as your data. There's a lot of caveats coming with the data. And so really we need to safeguard for that a lot. And expert knowledge really is helpful there. I think we can just go faster. We are still creative people, let's not forget that. And so AI has limitations. As my colleague says, it's machine learning, it's not magic. It has a lot of things to learn. And so definitely we need to actually, as researchers, think about new ways, new approaches, how we build those workflows I just showed. AI is not going to come necessarily with those type of concepts.
Hi, I had a question for the second speaker. So specifically about the target discovery tool you talked about. So can you comment about like how Velo Health thinks about how well the tool is performing? So if you look at hub proteins, for example, in your analysis, do the top targets that come out, are they things that people in this room already know about? Like how do you think about the value add for your tool, your ability to discover truly new targets?
Yeah,
and kind
definitely.
of quantitatively see like, oh, this is what we're getting out of using this tool versus just a really good cell biologist, for example, just looking at DetMap and
Yeah,
other
absolutely.
tools.
Definitely, there's a few things I think, are proof points that we identify along the way. I think the ultimate one is really testing in the clinic to see if it works. But those proof points are, can we find major pathways that have been discovered? Yes, we can. One of the main challenges targeting the immune system is not just about discovering the biology randomly in patients. It's really positioning it for the right patient and also we have the opportunity to uncover very new biologies as well. So I think to us is really looking into connections that people have not made before to make prediction for our level of success that we can achieve in the clinic and start to do those human experiments. So I'll give you an example with autoimmune disease. There is obviously, actually in Parkinson's, there's a lot of Parkinson's patients with autoimmune disease as a comorbidity. So we can start building a case for perhaps some of those drugs. But some of those immune cells do invade the brain. And so you might need brain penetrant molecules. Some of those molecules you cannot give chronically in this patient population. You might be able to de-risk. So I think it's really the target identification process is really for us, is really combined with what we do downstream with those insights. And at the same time, really targeting the right patient at the right time. And I think that piece is really critical for success.
Really love your insights. Couple questions, and they're kind of hopefully interrelated. So how close and what do we need to do before you can really predict all the missing data that you would like? In other words, you know, if you know a patient's social determinants of health, when can we then predict what their proteome is going, or proteomic profile in their serum is going to look like? You know, when can we fill in all these missing gaps? And we talk about there's a disconnect right now between RNA-seq data and proteomics data. When do we fill in that disconnect so we can actually make all these connections? If I run a proteomics experiment, I might get 5,000 proteins. When will I be able to then predict what the other 15,000 proteins and their phosphorylation patterns will look like? When can I get that entire picture? So when do you think that's going to happen? And the second part of that is, what data should we be collecting now to make this happen? Ultimately, to predict, you know, when I'm going to die. Okay.
Wow, that's a loaded question. I don't know if I want to predict when I'm going to die. But, you know, to answer your second question first, actually, because it's really linked, the right data are deep data. So you want to have longitudinal data. You want to have, especially in neurodegeneration, you know, a number of years that is consequential. And people are really starting to generate those data sets. So those are ongoing, what the Parkinson's Foundation is doing. Now they are getting into prodromal phase of the disease. Those are going to be transformative. As far as the prediction goes, it's hypothesis generating, and we need to go through those iteration process where we can actually test those hypotheses. So I'm excited, you know, with our ability now to recall those patients for which we can make predictions. So we're kind of entering that era in our company where we're going to start, you know, having a better view of the success rate here. But, you know, those inference so far have been pretty productive for us in the cardiovascular metabolic space. So I'm hopeful the prediction may be better than we expected. As far as how many patients would you need to have in, you know, with deeper data, I don't have the exact answer, but hopefully we'll have that soon.
And maybe just to add one more thing there, and I'm sure these efforts are ongoing, but it just seems like such an opportunity. You know, tox data, preclinical tox data are never published, always behind all kinds of firewalls. And if there was some way to kind of bring that together, I think these tools could do an enormous job of making sure that drugs that maybe shouldn't get to the clinic don't. And that seems like I mean, apologies if there are major efforts out there that are working on this, but that seems like a huge opportunity in my mind.
And toxicity is a major point for us, trying to mitigate that. So there's different prediction models for this, but also we go through like making sure we unlock the data and through partnerships, perhaps big pharma, things like that. You know, our partnership with Charles River that does generate a lot of insights and, you know, for us, the ability to access to those are going to be, I think, transformative.